So my name is Danielle. I work at Thurston High School in Redford, and I have been struggling a little bit with trying to figure out how to merge evaluations with efficiency and still getting students to reflect like they need to be reflecting, and still getting them to have good conversations with each other, especially in an environment where sometimes I have unequal class sizes. So, hi, come on. Oh my gosh, come on in, take a seat. So, for example, my first hour has 32 students and my sixth hour has 12. And so sometimes eliciting student reflections and getting students to discuss and to collaborate can be hard when you don't have as many voices in the room. So, our district uses Google for email and for everything else. So I've tried really hard to figure out how to make it work with the NGSS. And hopefully when you leave today, you'll have a couple of tips that you can try when you get back to your classroom. That'll be really easy to plug and play with on Monday. So a goal for today, we're gonna focus on how to use Google Apps in general to help kids engage in data reflection. And it doesn't need to take an entire class period. And you'll leave with 2 tangible templates and some tricks to use these to engage students in different reflections. If you want to follow along or click on any of the links yourself, I have a link for it, and you're welcome to type it in. But one thing I have noticed, I've done a lot of different tech trainings, and one thing I've noticed is I like to listen and then not have to write everything down at the same time. And so if I can follow along or go back and check on it later, that's always really helpful. So a little bit about me. This is my 7th year teaching. I got my bachelor's in biology and music from U of M.
Just put that anywhere.
The glass breaking outside was not part of my presentation. I got my master's last year in curriculum leadership from Eastern. And I have a secondary teaching certificate in biology, integrated science, and psychology. And right now I'm in the process of becoming a Google certified educator. It's not a really difficult thing to do, it's just a little time consuming. And it's funny, I thought that as soon as I clicked, I said, I can do level 1. That'll be so easy. And there's so much I didn't know. So going back through learning things, and even though I use the Google Suite on a daily basis, and I thought I was really well equipped with it, there's a lot of things I didn't know. And so going through that training has been really helpful as well. Our district had an initiative last year called Next Generation Classrooms. And so basically, we're a team of teachers. We had to apply for the grant, and we could have used the money allotted for a variety of things. Most of us use it for technology and for furniture. Oh, no problem. My classroom I have a really big room, and I'm fortunate to have that, but I had these really bulky lab tables, and so I could never get kids. It was an event to move the tables to get them to work in groups. It's like, okay, everyone stop. Pick up your table, 2 people have to pick it up, don't drag it across the floor. So I got some tables that work, they move well, they move around a little bit more. And I also give students the option to sit in different spots in my room. So there is always a seating chart, but on certain days they're allowed, once we give directions, they can work at different stations, and they have lots of different spots they can sit. I've also done 2 action research projects to figure out what the effect is of blended learning on student attitude and student achievement, and see, does technology really help? Is it actually making a difference? Do students care? Or is it just a novelty to sit at a Chromebook and type it in instead of write it out? I have found both times I give students a lot of surveys, and I ask them what they think, and then I change things as a result. Students do like technology, but it also needs to have a purpose. And just giving them a Chromebook and say, okay, I integrated technology is not enough. So it needs to be purposeful. So, and as I'm thinking about all this, we still have evaluations, and I don't know what your district uses. We use Danielson in our district. And a big part of Danielson is getting students to do a lot of the work, and getting students to reflect, and having students drive discussions, and students ask questions. And all of that's wonderful, except before I started using Google, the only way I could figure out how to get kids to think about their data, to analyze their data, was with folders. And so I gave every student, all of my 120 students, a folder, and it was alphabetized, and in their folder they had, this is from 2015, they had a bar graph, and they did their pre-test, their post-test. I would give them a print-off from my star that had all of the standards and how well they did. I'd give them little slips of paper, and they'd have to figure out how to color in a bar graph. And then I had reflection questions. And I had this lofty goal that I was going to read through all of the folders once they turned them in and give feedback to all of the students. And we laughed because it just doesn't happen. And I told the students, I look at all of these. I look at all of them, you get points for doing things. And I would give them participation points. And I would have these, and then someone's schedule would change. So I had them organized with the tabs alphabetically, and then someone would get a new schedule, and now they're in a different hour bin. And it was stressful and it was frustrating. And if a student was absent, they're coloring in the wrong unit for their bar graph because they weren't there to get that score. And so it took a long time. Like, I would have a day blocked out a couple years ago just for tracking our data. And then we'd have a homework assignment you could start early afterwards. Because students were going through the motions, they weren't getting a lot out of it. They cared more about making a pattern of colors on their bar graph than seeing how much growth they had. They wanted to make sure if it went yellow, orange, pink, that it continued going yellow, orange, pink, yellow, orange, pink. So a little bit I didn't mention this at the beginning, I teach 9th grade science. And so a lot of my stories and examples come from my fabulous 14-year-olds that really want the best marker. And sometimes student growth isn't necessarily in the forefront of their brains. I also teach AP psychology this year, so I've had a way to, been exploring how to get this to work in that class as well, and I'll show you a little bit. But I had this realization, and my realization was this. If the only reason we're doing something is because it's what we've always done, we need to stop and you need to change it. If you think about it, you say, why do I do this? And the only reason is, well, it's what I've always done. I've done it since I was a first-year teacher. I've done it for 6 years. It's what the whole department does. That's not a good reason. And so when I finally got this in my head, and I said, okay, how do I change it? And I sat in a PD one morning with one of my coworkers. She teaches math. And I kept making this sheet, this Google sheet, and I would send it to her, and I said, pretend you're a kid, type in a test score. And so she'd type it in, and it wouldn't work, and so she'd send it back, and I'd keep editing it until I got it to work. So, a little bit of how I got here. I went through the NGSX training at Wayne Risa, and as I was starting to see a couple years ago that my focus needed to shift to more of a modeling, to more questioning, to more discussion in my classroom, and I didn't need to be standing there giving notes, having kids fill in the blanks, and then having kids color in bar graphs afterwards. And spending 30 minutes graphing and coloring was a waste of everyone's time. Feedback needed to be immediate, and if feedback isn't immediate for students, it's not useful. If they have to wait too long to get feedback, they've already forgotten what happened. They've forgotten where they've struggled, they've forgotten what mistakes they've made, they forgot where they needed to improve, they forgot. As soon as they leave your room, if they know they don't get it back for a week, when they get back the paper, they say, what is this again? Oh yeah, okay, and it goes in their folder, or it's left on the table, and you see it for the next hour and you pick it up. So, I ended up with Google because Google's a district initiative with the Next Generation Classrooms. We went to a lot of tech trainings. I said, okay, I'm gonna make this work for me. And the more I fussed with it, the more I've realized I can see qualitative and quantitative data. It's not just test scores. I use this every day in all different ways in my classroom. It also allows my kids to receive immediate feedback. They can collaborate with each other, and they revise their work quickly. I make comments on their documents as they're working, and I'm gonna close this. They revise their work. As soon as I make a comment, I can see them go back in and type. I use it for reviews with my kids. Instead of giving them a review sheet, I'll post review questions, and they work in teams. And I'll make comments on it, and I'll ask, can you explain this a little bit more? And I see the cursor click over, and I see them type. You should also know in advance, we are not a one-to-one school. So everything I'm saying here, I have 8 Chromebooks in my classroom that I have on a daily basis, and we have Chromebook carts that I can check out. And we kind of share them in departments throughout the building. So this is not something that I know my students have computers at home. I don't. I don't know if they have internet access at home. They don't have a computer with them all day in school. And so I said, well, I'm gonna see how it goes. So as I'm thinking about evals again, because it's always this looming thing, you fill out your goals and you know, okay, I could be doing the most amazing things in my classroom, but if it doesn't check the boxes of an evaluation, my kids are doing great and I can see they're growing, but if I can't demonstrate that to my evaluator, they're not going to see it that way. So 2 years ago, I redesigned everything. It was risky, and I knew things were going to fail, and I tell my kids all the time, you're not going to get it right the first time. And I'm a very type A person, so the fact that I was changing everything and I knew things were going to go wrong, I was like, okay, well, we're going to see what happens because there's no other option. Like, this is what my kids need. So I tried a blended learning approach, and I just started small. I just did pre and post tests. I said, this is like something I'll do every quarter, manageable, I have time to fix it. And so through Google, I can empower my students in data tracking, in data analysis, and in data reflection. And I don't grade any data folders. I don't have any papers that come back to me, and I grade it all in the hour. So they get their feedback that hour, they leave knowing where they need to improve, and they leave knowing that I saw their work. So a process that used to take most of a class period takes no more than 15 minutes. The first day always takes maybe a half hour when I have to explain how it all works. But now, whenever we have a quarterly or we have to track data, I put it on the slide, grab a Chromebook, and log in, you have data tracking. If we're doing something online or we're doing station work, one of the stations is get to the station, track your data, answer the questions, move on. Students find the process meaningful when I get feedback from them the past couple of years. That was one of the things I was most nervous about was, are kids gonna even notice a difference? And I give real-time comments. I also have a Chromecast in my room, so what I can do is, and I'll tell you a couple little hints that I use too, but I'll sometimes if some kid has a really good reflection, I'll make a comment on it, and then I'll throw it up on the screen and I'll say, hey guys, I just want to get everyone's attention for a second because Johnny over here did a really nice job with his reflection, and I just want to show you. Or I just want to tell you guys that Miranda just did she improved by 40%. And now Miranda's at mastery level. And we kind of celebrate it, and we're happy for each other, and then I take it back off and we keep going. It's not enough for anyone to put it on Snapchat and to talk about it, just enough to celebrate that, hey, there was a success, we saw it, and it makes that student feel so good. So what I do also for my evaluations is that I don't like to spend time when I would go before. I'd give my evaluator my data folder and say, this is how I do it in my classroom. And then they would have to take the time to sit there and look at it and then come up with questions. And it was always a little awkward to sit there because I knew what it was. And so I'd sit there and watch them look at it. And then they'd ask me a couple questions and it didn't go much further. Where now, with Google Sheets, I just share it with them in advance. They can look at it if they want to. They can have follow-up questions for me. They have time to process. They can ask me why I do it this way. And then in the meeting, we're actually able to discuss instead of me sit there and wait for them to read. So I'll show you a little bit about how this works. So where I started was pre and post tests, and I've tweaked it a little bit over time, and I'll tell you some of the pitfalls I found the first time. But I'm gonna show you a template first. And the template, I'm gonna pretend to be a student here. Apparently it logged me out. There we go. All right, so when a student logs in, does anyone in here use Google Classroom in their room? Okay. So when I assign this as an assignment in Google Classroom, and if you don't use Google Classroom, I can show you what that looks like. But I assign it as an assignment, and you have a few different options, and one of them is to make a copy for every student. You can give students an option to view a file, to edit a file, or to make a copy. And I make a copy, and automatically at the top it puts their name, which is wonderful. It can cause some issues in the future when they forget to put their name on papers, because normally Ms. A magically knows who turned in everything because their name is on it. But up at the top it would say student data folder, hi, come on in, hi. And so they would have their name right next to it. So mine would say student data folder, Danielle Aguilar, right at the top. This one's just blank, but I am going to be a student. Go with that. So you can see me up here with my, you can see my name, Danielle Aguilar, and so I'm typing on this Chromebook here. And so I got a 34% over here for my pretest score. So if I go back up and I type in 34, it automatically makes a bar graph for me. When I type in my quarter one score, let's say I learned some more material, I got a 65%. So kids will have this issue, and that's why I typed it in this way. They'll say, Miss A, I got a higher score, my graph's broken. Up here at the top, and I'm going to zoom in here, if I can, on this one. Up here at the top, what's different about the numbers?
65 is a percent, 34 is not.
One's a percent and one's not. And so students sometimes, depending on how I give them the score, if I give it to them as 34 out of 100, or if I write 34%, they'll type it in directly that way. So they just need to make sure they type it in with, if they put a percent, and sometimes I'll say, you know what, and if you want to write it as a percent, then make sure this other one, you type in 34%, and just go back and change it, and you'll see that your graph fixes itself. And they'll type it in, and then down here I have questions for them. And the questions say, for September, what is one expectation you have for science this year? What grade would you like to have in this class on your report card? What grade would you like to have for the whole semester? And we have a discussion about what semester grades are. Identify 2 things that make you a good student. Identify 1 thing you need to improve on as a student. And this is one of the first weeks of school, so I'm also learning about my kids. And I'm learning, a lot of students will say, especially if you're not in honors, I'm not good at science. So that's when I'll put a comment up there and I'll say, why do you think that? Why are you not good at science? What has made you think that you can't do that? In November, a lot of times I just take the same question and I change it a little bit, and you'll get a blank copy of this. It's a link at the end of the presentation. It says, look at your answer from September. Is science what you expected? So looking back at that expectation, is it what you've expected so far? Sometimes they'll say yes, sometimes they'll say no, it's completely different. Is your grade what you hoped it would be? Explain why or why not. How can you improve your grade for the next report card? And you'll have students that have an A, and they'll say, I just want to keep my A. Or Miss A, I can't improve. You can always improve. You have an A. How could it be a stronger A? Have you been writing everything in the reflection form you need to? Identify 2 things you've improved since September, and identify 1 thing you need to keep working on as a student. Most of the time, I get to keep my students for 2nd semester, so they get a chance to do January. This is their final exam for our class. If they don't, what I typically do, because I think this is valuable for them to look back, is we have an advisory time during our school day, which is after 3rd hour, and we can push and pull kids to different classes. And I will ask the kids that I had, I'll talk to the other science teacher and I'll say, hey, Chloe she transferred to you 2nd semester. I'm going to give her an advisory pass, so I need to make sure she comes and sees me and finishes her data tracking. Or if I see her in the hallway, I say, hey, I do want you to finish your data tracking. I think it's valuable for you to know that information. And most of the time they do. So identify 2 things you did well this semester and 1 thing you still need to keep working on. And then for June, I'll set goals for next year. How do you want to do in 10th grade? What do you expect? So
you don't check in with them again until June, from January? Or?
So on the data tracking, for quarterly tests, I just do beginning, end of quarter, and then final exam. Okay. Just for these. Throughout the semester, we're talking, and they do a lot of goal setting, just looking back at things. I'll have them refer to it. I'll have them answer it as a bell work question. I'll say, hey, if we have the Chromebook card, I'll say, hey, before we start today, pull up your data tracking sheet and jot down 3 things that you're doing to achieve your goals. Do you still see those things as weaknesses? So this is just one that's more of a formal way for them to type it in, but they go through and kind of formatively check on themselves throughout the semester. So a student example that I'll show you is right up here. This is a student from my AP psychology class. So I showed you what it looks like in physical science. This is what AP Psych would look like. Does anyone teach an AP class in here? Okay. What do you teach?
AP Computer Science.
Okay. So AP Psych, I don't know if there's any written portion of computer science. But AP Psych has 2 written portions, and so they're called FRQs, free response questions. And so when I was thinking about how I teach AP Psych, I do the same thing where they have an ability to do a rewrite and then they get an average score after each of their written assessments. And so I have them track and see kind of what their average is for their original score, how are they doing? If they have to do a lot of rewrites, how are those looking? And then how do your grades look afterwards? And they have reflection questions as well. I don't require kids to use capital letters or proper punctuation, but they do need to use full words. So I tell them, I say, you know, you're writing to me as your teacher. I want a complete thought. I would prefer you use capital letters and periods. But as long as you're not saying cuz, C-U-Z, or B/C, I'll take it and I'll read it. So a lot of times what I'll do is while they're working on this, I open all of the tabs. So the third bullet here, I go to my computer and I'll walk around with my Chromebook and I'll be making comments, but I'm logged in at my desktop and I have pulled open every single child's Google Sheet. And it just says Miss A, my little icon, and I'm watching everybody. They give the illusion they don't know who it is, but they know I'm commenting randomly. They don't know if I'm looking at theirs. My computer just says I'm on the spreadsheet, which keeps them in line, and it kind of makes sure that they're being on task. And if they haven't answered the questions yet, I'll just put I'll insert a comment. There's a shortcut for it, Control-Alt-M, and I'll click on something and I'll hit that, and I'll just type in, why haven't you answered your questions yet? And they'll give me this look. Sorry, Miss A. And they'll go back and start checking. Sometimes I'll write them a comment and they can comment right back on me. And I'll just ask them a question. What do you mean by this? What do you mean do better? What does that mean to you? Couple things at the top though. Wrapping text. It's something that I took for granted when I first did this. And I made my Google spreadsheet. I got the graph to work. That was my biggest challenge. And so I got the graph to work. And I put the questions at the bottom and I shared it to all of my students. Everyone got their copy and they're typing. And then I just saw hands start popping up across the room. And you know that moment where you answer one question and then you look out and you see 5 other hands and you realize you've made a mistake. Like something is wrong. And everyone got to the same point at the same time. And you realize, oh gosh, what did I do? And everyone's text was cutting off on their cell. I'm gonna say, I can't see what I typed. And so we'd stop. And I drew the arrow. If I had a whiteboard, I'd show you, but I drew the wrap text arrow on Google Sheets, which is just a little curved arrow. I said, okay, you're gonna click on all of your cells and you're gonna click this arrow. Because if you don't use Google Classroom, I'm gonna tell you this now. If you ever make a copy of a document for all of your students, if you go back and change your original, it does not change theirs. You have to change every individual student's. Now you better believe that I fixed it for all of my other classes that day, but my first hour, when I got done, I just walked out in the hallway for hall duty with my coffee, and I was like, we got through it, and it's okay. And it didn't go great, but it's okay. So we learned that's something I took for granted, that people knew how to wrap text. And I realized I didn't know how to wrap text when I was a freshman in high school. But it's something I forgot. So now when I make the form and the link one I have for you, everything, I select all those boxes and I make sure they're all wrapped. So that when the kids start typing, they don't even notice an issue. So I don't have that issue anymore. But it was nerve-wracking that day. So here's something else to know though. Not all of your data is quantitative in class. It doesn't all have numbers. It's not a pre and post test. And as educators, we know that. And sometimes that's one of the biggest issues with an evaluation is how do I describe this student on a test score? You don't understand how far they've come this year. They're doing so well. Or this student is emotionally impaired, but you have no idea how many great questions they're asking right now. And they are sitting in my room and they're talking to people and people are listening to them. I had a student 2 years ago who chooses to not speak. He has a pretty severe speech impediment and is incredibly shy. and we do a fourth quarter project, and I actually changed my rules for him. And I told him, I said, I just announced the class, I said, you're in groups of 4, but only to get full credit, only 2 people in your group have to speak. And I intentionally put them in a group where there were at least 3 vocal people. So I knew, I said, everyone has to stand up there and own your presentation, but only 2 people have to speak. And I said, I don't care who it is, it doesn't matter to me, just when you get up there, 2 different voices have to speak. And the student spoke. And he stood up there, and the entire class was silent. And everyone just started clapping. And I was like, and my co-teacher was in there with me, and her and I just looked at each other, and we were like, okay, don't make a big deal, just this is amazing. And I can't quantify this, and I wasn't recording it, and I didn't have all of these, it was just a day in my classroom, and this kid did amazing. And so I went up to him after, waited till everyone left, and that's when I told him, I said, I am so proud of you today. And he just like shyly shook his head and said, you know what, thanks. I said, you did so well. But things like that, like, I can't put that on a Google form. I could tell that story, but I can't say, oh yeah, my kids track it and they reflect and we're doing great. There's so many other things that happen. So 2 other things I've used to just try and get more voices heard in my classroom. I use Google Slides and Google Forms. So if you're familiar with Google Slides or Google in general, Google Slides is like a PowerPoint. And then Google Forms is like a Survey Monkey or some kind of survey. So I use Google Slides to facilitate brainstorming, especially, like I said at the beginning, my class sizes aren't super even. And so I have 2 honors classes and I have a co-taught class this year. So I have a pretty wide range. I don't actually have just one general population physical science class. And so it makes a lot of my discussions polarized. Some are lead themselves, and some we're pulling through the mud and we're coming together and it's slow. I also extend and enhance gallery walks. So when I use whiteboards in class, my first hour that has 32 students has they have 8 whiteboards out instead of my 6 hour that has 3 whiteboards out. And so when we're trying to develop our models and to refine our models, there's just something lacking in my 6th hour, and it's not their fault. They didn't choose to be in a small class, and normally it works great, but when we're trying to get more voices heard, there's some issues. I use Google Forms to evaluate discussions. As a department, we have a discussion rubric tool that we use, and I have the kids do it on Google Forms. And then I also collect student feedback. But 2 things I want to say. Always discuss the results you get with kids. Always. Always discuss the trends. Model what you expect from them. So we look at data, we say, okay, where they're increasing, or I see mostly 4s. Explain what that means. We do think alouds, and we model how to read, and we model how to question, but we need to model how to look at data too. And not just say, look at it, you'll see it's different. Model it, explain it, like talk through your thought process. And it might seem, you might have juniors in your class and say, okay, they should know this. Don't assume they know it. Assume that you need to show them what you expect and model that expectation for them. So in my classroom, when we have our driving questions, I have a board with whiteboard wall paint on it. And for our very first unit of the year, I put up 4 big questions. And this is actually in my co-taught class. You're going to notice there's a lot of student handwriting on here. With my co-teacher, what we discovered is our very first discussion that we had the first week of school was hard. And I'm talking with the special ed department. There's some reservations that they have about some students don't process really quickly in a verbal way. And so they're asked a question, and by the time they've formulated their answer, they're not ready to speak, or someone else has already spoken. It doesn't matter if you have the longest wait time in the world, they might have a longer one. So what I do is, I've changed it a little bit now, and so what I do is I have students on their own for their bell work. I will give them these 4 questions. What makes us go? How do we get somewhere on time? How do we get where we want to be? And how does gravity affect us? And we were talking about Newton's laws, but I didn't tell them that. I just said, jot down anything you know about these 4 questions. So they did. And then I had them talk about it with people at their tables. They sit in tables of 4. I kind of talk about share your ideas. Then I gave them a marker, and I said, write at least one of the ideas up on the wall. And so for what makes us go, some of my students said sports. Football makes me go. And I was like, okay, I didn't think of it that way, but that's how you took the question. And so we just talk about it, and we talk about different trends we see, and I take a picture of it. I take a picture of everything students write. Then, in my honors class, you'll notice this is a little more straight, and it's only because I serve as the scribe. And so we circle up in a discussion, and I give them time to brainstorm before the discussion, but then we start talking. And they're posing questions to each other, and I'll stop them. I'll ask, would it be okay if I write this on the board? Or I write this on the wall? And so I clarify, but I keep a log. And then what I do is the next day, I show all of these slides back to my students. And I say, I want to show you all of the stuff we learned yesterday from all of the classes to get everyone's voice heard. And we talk about trends we see between classes. I say, don't worry, I didn't show 4th hour what you guys wrote. Let's just talk about it. And we kind of get all of those voices heard that way. Something to know. When you're doing any kind of discussion, I'm going to show you a rubric in just a second that I use for my students. But after we've done something like that and we've discussed it as a group, always explain what you expect, but also explain how they're going to evaluate it. At the beginning of the year, I always fill out a sample evaluation before we've even talked about anything. I say, okay, tomorrow we're going to start using a discussion. I said, so I'm going to show you afterwards, I'm going to have you fill out a form about what you thought about the discussion. Let me show you what I think. And we talk about it. We did a whole chalk talk just on what do you like about discussions and what do you not like about discussions. I said, I'm sure that someone has had a discussion with you by the time you've gotten to me in 9th grade. What do you like, what don't you like, and what makes it work well? And then we evaluated it. I said, we're going to do this together. And I say, okay. And when I open this form, it asks for their name. Always separate first and last name so that you can sort them. If I was to type in just name, I would type in Danielle Aguilar, and I would get sorted with the D's. I always start by first and last name. I have them write their class so that I know I can sort by hour. I can see how it went for different hours. And then they go through, and I have a PDF of this for you guys. If you want a hard copy, I have some as well. Different goals, and this is all from MGSX, of how students share, expand, and clarify their ideas. And we talk about it. We say, okay, what does this mean? And we go through each one. How many times did you notice people answering in more than 1 to 2 words in your group? And I change the words group or class depending on how we do it. Sometimes we do small group discussions and then just share what each group talked about. Sometimes I'll change it and I'll say, how many times did you notice this in the class? But I always go through this with kids first. Show them what I expect. I go through, we do a pretend one, just to see how it would go. So, sometimes, apparently, it also just, there it is, came back. When we're also talking about class discussions, you stress that you want it to be honest and accurate. Don't ever grade them based on how this might be common sense to some of us, but don't ever grade them based on what they write. Just grade them based on, you get points just for filling it out. Be honest. I don't care what you say. I'm actually not looking at, Billy wrote this specifically. I might go back and look at certain kids and see if they tried to dominate the conversation. I might see how they thought it went. If some kids seemed to they had a hard time getting their voice heard, I might click on them and say, okay, what did they actually think? How did they feel about it? In my psychology class, I collect data when we do different experiments in different scenarios. So we learned about ostracism a couple units ago, and we did a model train where everyone sat in rows and they all got a role card and they had to play whatever their role was. And they had, some kids were ignoring other kids, some kids were being intentionally rude, some kids were trying to get their point across. And we talked about how stereotypes and prejudice can start. Well, we did this whole thing, and I made it this big mystical experience. So as soon as we came back, it was all in the hallway, so we came back in the classroom and I gave them one rule. I said, do not talk to a single person. You open your Chromebook, fill out the form, and we'll discuss. And it was silent, and so they came back in. Kids were trying to talk. I said, no, don't say a thing. And then what we did is when we pulled up the data, we actually were able to look at trends and say, okay, if you had this roll card, most of you put this rating. And so we were able to take a look on how people felt. They had two different tickets, a T or an S. It meant something to me. It didn't mean anything to them. And I was able to sort it and say, okay, if you had a T ticket, you felt really excluded. And we would look and we would see if the data supported that. If you had an S ticket and they say, how did you feel? People would say, I felt bad because I was excluding someone. I say, okay, well, let's see how our data supports that. And we talk about it. With Google Forms, if you are the person that made the form, you can see the responses. You can also click this little plus sign, the green plus sign, and you actually can see it as a spreadsheet too. And what I did for this activity is I added a row once I sorted them, and I found the averages. So sometimes kids, we all kind of look at them like it's a bunch of ones and numbers. I don't know what it means. So we look at averages. We say, okay, on average, on a scale of 1 to 5, most of you put a 3.9. That's pretty high. And we talk about what that meant. It made talking about a really tough subject in that class a little bit easier because we were able to look at some data with it instead of talking about a lot of personal experiences. Because sometimes it gets a little, I get a little nervous and I just throw out a question in psych and say, okay, I know that this is gonna come up with a lot of emotions. So let's have a talking point first, and then if you're comfortable to share, you can. Last thing I'll show you before I give you your templates is in science we use whiteboarding. And so this week we're talking about nuclear fusion in class. And so before we did anything else, with my freshmen I asked them, what do you think an atom looks like? And they just were smushing marshmallows together. It's a pretty simple experiment to look at. It takes some energy, it takes some heat, it takes some pressure to get two marshmallows to go into one marshmallow. And what I do is I post on Google Classroom a slideshow. It's completely blank. And I just give kids permission to edit. So it's one slideshow. And they work in groups of 4. They do the mashing after they've drawn their models. They revise their model. And then we walk around. We do a gallery walk. And before they erase their board, I don't give them an eraser beforehand. I said, you can cross things out. You can kind of use your fingers, but I prefer that you leave everything on your board. And I give them a really big board, and I say, there's lots of space. You can always cross off what you didn't like, but leave it there just in case. You don't want to think back and say, what did we write? That was really good. Just leave it there. So take a picture before you go and upload it to a slide. Something I've learned is I put more than enough slides than we need because students will accidentally delete someone else's. And so each group takes a picture. I said, I know you all have a cell phone. Someone take one out, take a picture, and upload it. And so what we get is by the end of the day, I get a really cool PowerPoint. And these people, when I said draw what you think an atom is, they wrote Adam Levine. I said, okay, that's fine. Just write it, whatever it is. And so this is one group's. As I go through, I can see lots of different ones. I gave them some information of hydrogen and helium. I didn't tell them what an atomic number was. I just put a 1 and a 2. I drew it on the board and I said, make a prediction on what that means. I said, it might be useful, it might not be. I also put up carbon, nitrogen, and iron. Because we're talking about stars. And I said, I put up hydrogen and helium. I said, you have to write that on your board, but the other ones are up here just for reference. But all they had was a number. I said, guess what it means? And some kids would say things like, it's the amount of hydrogen, or it's how many I need. And you know, we're still working through that. Hydrogen doesn't necessarily, we're trying to figure out how they all relate to each other. But some kids drew this model of the atom because they told me it was a throwback to the Jimmy Neutron days of their life. And it was something I saw a lot. I saw some students that as the day went on, some kids put their marshmallows on the board and added it to their model. Other students, one of my personal favorites was this one. Their atom is right here. And they wrote really large, very microscopic. But you know, but as they're putting these up, some pictures are big, some pictures are small, and I'll go back through and I'll make sure they're centered so I can show it the next day in class. But we talk about it again, so we talk about it in our group, but then I go back and I show them and say, hey, you didn't get to see what the other classes put, and they put a lot of really good things. So we're gonna go through and talk about some of these. Do you wanna revise your model? I don't have enough whiteboards to keep them all on display in the room. I wish I could, but I can't. This is a way that I can capture them, make sure they don't go away. and I can make sure that my students get to hear all of the voices, not just the honors voices, but they can hear students that are certified, and they can hear gen ed students, and they can hear everybody in there, and hear how everyone else looked at the issue, or looked at the question that we have. So, as a teacher, when they do this, I walk around, I make sure I say, okay, before you erase, and I'll have the erasers, just washcloths. I say, before I give you this, did you submit? Yeah, I did, and I have either a clipboard or I have my Chromebook, and I double check, and I can see, like, okay, yes, I see your picture there. Okay, great, erase, and make sure they have it there. You can always hit undo. If someone goes, I deleted it, the back arrow is your friend. Hit it, it'll come back. But what I have for you is I have the blank Google Sheet template if you want to use anything for pre and post tests. And I also have how we evaluate discussions. I have it as a PDF in this file, and I'll put the link back up in a second. But I have it as a printout too. So if you have not gone through NGSX, or you've never gotten a checklist to kind of see how our discussion's going in your class, this is a really good tool. The form I've used is someone in my department went through and typed all of this up, and then certain words where I had a lot of hands again on like the first day of school, because some of the words they didn't know what they meant. So I went back through and made it 9th grade language. So what I would suggest is use it how you need to. You could always even laminate it and just use it for yourself. But it's a really good way to make sure that all voices are heard, kids are expanding on their ideas, and actually that they're listening to each other. I think it's valuable to hear from the kids too, and to make sure that they felt like they were being heard from. Because a lot of times, as teachers, we can look out and we can say, you know, I think it went really well today, and completely miss, unless we're tracking it, we could miss that 2 people didn't talk, because it seems like everyone talked. Unless we're drawing lines and we're marking down who's talking, we can miss it. And so I like to know, how do kids feel about it? How do they think it was worthwhile? So I have a number if you're getting sketches and you need the sketch number. Definitely write that down. It's 40634. And if you would like the link to the presentation, I will put that up as well. Please eat some chocolate or take it with you, because I really don't need to take it all home with me.
Now, at the beginning it said Google 18.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, I will fix that. No, that's totally fine.
Okay, and I had a question.
Yes.
So, you said that you aren't one-to-one, and so how do the kids reflect and respond so frequently on Google Docs if they don't have like access to a Chromebook? Do they go on their phones, or?
They can go on their phones.
Okay.
I have 8 Chromebooks in my classroom. So a lot of times, what I'll do is I will either have them go on their phones, or I'll set up a station. And if I set up a station, chances are I'm taking more than a day to do it. I have several stations. We have 2 different bell schedules, so depending on the day, if it's a 45-minute day, and that's when I'm rolling it out, it's going to take a second day. And so I will have students at least stop by the station before you go. And I make sure I post first day of school. If they have a smartphone, they sign up for a reminder for me. But they also, I make sure they download the Google Classroom app if they have space on their phone. It's free. And I said, and then you'll get a notification from me. But the link is always there too. I said, you can download. That's fine. If I need them to do it as a whole class, I check out a computer lab. And if the Chromebook card's not available, I check out a lab, and I make sure whatever we're doing online, they have time to do that too. Yes?
You may have covered this, but I am interested in knowing if Google Sheets or if there's another Google tool where multiple classes or multiple students within a class could enter data and have it show up on a line or bar graph, pie chart. So that's a tool I'd like to use. I'm actually working with schools that come to our site, but we're staying in touch before and afterward.
Gotcha.
And we'd like them to be able to share data together.
I think Google Sheets would be a good way to do it. What I do, and I can try and throw this up here for you really quick. What I do for this is let me pull this up. Dismiss. Is if you're making a new Google Sheet. So on here, I'm going to hit New Spreadsheet. And I'm just going to type the test. When I'm doing this, I would select whatever cells I want, just like Excel. You would select it, and you can't see the menus up here, but you can actually create a chart from it, and then it'll generate the graph right off to the side. So I can pull it up on this one for you. And so what I will do is I'll highlight those. I might put the headers of maybe the data I want to collect. And what you can do is send that out. You would need to make a Google Classroom for, that would be what I would suggest, is make a Google Classroom for like everyone that's participating so they get their own copy. Because the only downside is if you use this to make a bar graph, it doesn't connect them all together. If you want cumulative data and you want everyone to see that, I would actually use a Google form. And what I would do is if it's numerical, make a question of what was the mass you got for your first substance and have them actually type it in or select like from a choice or a range. And then what you can do is you'd make the bar graph yourself, but you could actually get the data and it'd go on a spreadsheet for you.
Okay.
So it really depends if you want to just be able to have them show their own data and look at everyone else's data, do a sheet. If you want all of the data in one spot, do a form.
So if the form, so this would be cumulative data over time, so growing plants or,
Yes.
but then you're saying I would collect it, make the chart, but then could they continue to enter their data and have it show up?
You might need to modify or tweak the chart a little bit, but on your end, the Google form that I showed you for my for collecting data, this one here. When I go to this one, if everyone's typing in their numerical data, you can also do a short answer. So they can type in like 3.54 centimeters. Make sure the units are all the same. And when you click responses, if you click on this little spreadsheet, you'll see everyone's and you can sort it. That would be the best way, is you could always track the averages that way. And if you had it set up to do an average of the whole column, you could just put in, like click the cell and click equals average.
Okay.
And it would go right to the graph. So whenever someone else put something in, it would automatically update it.
You could have them keep putting on the new form and it'll keep adding to your spreadsheet. So if you did like Friday of 1 week, you can just use this form and it'll go on that spreadsheet. And then Friday the next week, use this form again and it'll go on and then you can sort the data and say this is what it looked like this Friday and this is what it looked like this Friday.
Yes, thank you. So also on this, there's a timestamp. So you can select out what date they put it in so that you can look at just the data on those dates.
Maybe that's something I would share with the teacher, because we're talking lots of schools and lots of kids, so maybe we do want to keep the dialogue going.
Yeah.
But maybe, I guess it would be up to the teacher. We could share that that's an option for them.
Yes.
And then if they want to work with that data, and then we check in on that, something like that. It's
I
helpful.
think that'd be, yeah, hopefully that helped a little bit. Any other questions? Or, yeah.
Just wanted to double check because I don't have Google Classroom.
Yeah.
But I think the forms you can still do, and you have students do that without having their own Google one. Are
So,
you a Google school?
So Google Forms, the question was like, you can still fill out a Google form if you don't have a Google email address. What I would suggest though is when you go to set it up, make sure that if you click on the little wheel, the gear up at the top, make sure, this one is restricted to South Redford schools users. Just make sure that's not clicked. So if you make it on like your school email address or any email address, you can click off on that so that students, anybody with the link can actually do that. And you can get a link for it and make it shorter. But definitely that's an issue I've run into is kids will say, I can't get on. I'm like, wait a minute, on your school email, go on your school email. Any other questions? All right. Thank you guys for coming in. I appreciate it. No problem. If you have any questions, I will make sure that my email address is in the slideshow as well. So if you wrote down the link and you have any questions you want to ask me, feel free. I'm learning too, so if you have another idea and you want to let me know, I would love to know. You're welcome.